Hello, Sarah Sabin, executive and team coach here in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series. And I am thrilled to have with me here today Ben McKean, who is founder and CEO of Hungryroot. Ben, welcome to the show. And could you briefly introduce yourself to my audience, please?
Sure. Thank you for having me on. I'm Ben McKean. I'm the founder and CEO of Hungryroot. Hungryroot makes it easy to eat healthy. We use AI to understand our customer preferences and to fill their grocery carts with healthy groceries and simple recipes that make them feel their best.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting because I heard a statistic today that was something along the lines of only 3% of Americans lead a healthy lifestyle, which is a terrifyingly low number. But obviously, you're helping to lead the cause of promoting health in people's lives. I'm curious to understand why that's so important to you. So why build a company around that?
Yeah, well, 3% is definitely a terrifying statistic if that's the extent to which Americans are living healthy lives. But health is very personal to people, and food is very emotional to people. The foods that we eat impact us on many different dimensions. They impact us chemically. They impact our sense of whether we're disciplined and sort of proud of sticking to a diet, or whether we feel guilt and regret from what we ate the night before. So food is deeply personal, deeply emotional. That's what inspired me to start Hungry. I'm an entrepreneur, been one my whole life. I started my first company at 18. Hungry is my third business, and what was most important to me in starting Hungry was to find an opportunity that could really connect with people on an emotional level. And I think food is highly unique in its ability to do so.
I 100% agree. And you've been going for what? It's nearly 9 years now that you've been doing
That's
this.
right. That's
Okay.
right. 8.5 years.
Awesome. So, in terms of getting the business to its current stage, what do you consider to be some of the most significant challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them?
I'll try to answer this as succinctly as possible, but we've faced many challenges. So when I started the company in 2015, I thought of it as an online CPG, an online consumer packaged goods company. So we actually created 6 SKUs of essentially the frozen dinner in a fresh, healthy format,
Mm.
and we sold them online. So we thought of the business as the Allbirds of food, or sort of the next General Mills or the next Kraft Heinz. It was really, we were creating food products and selling them online. And that was what the business was for the first 4 years. We grew from 6 SKUs to 60 SKUs in 2019, and 25 million of revenue in 2019. But we weren't growing at the rate we felt was possible, and we were unprofitable. So in 2019, I pivoted the business to being what it is today, which is an online grocery service. We realized you can create the best CPG products, but if you're a consumer, it's always going to be more convenient to buy those alongside the rest of your groceries. People don't want to go to one website to get their yogurt, another website to get their produce, another website to get their fish and meat. So in 2019, we pivoted the business to be an online grocery service. That's when we really built the entire platform on AI. That was, talk about challenges. That was a major pivot for the company. That was a major challenge. There were two major pivots before that, actually. In 2017, we were sort of just really starting to get some momentum. We were doing about $10 million of revenue a year. But it was just a very unmanageable operation. And so we actually shut the entire business down for 6 months to completely reconfigure our supply chain. So that was sort of pivot number one. 2018 was pivot number two. The first pivot had really worked, and we had a lot of momentum behind us. We raised a Series B financing, and we came out of that saying, our brand positioning is not resonating with consumers today. So we need to go deep in one of two paths. We can either be like really focus on this CPG angle and really highlight the individual products and the uniqueness of the products. Or we can be this personalized grocery service. And in 2018, we decided the former, to go really deep on the CPG positioning. By early 2019, we realized it wasn't working. And that's when we pivoted into the latter, into being what we are today, the personalized grocery service.
Wow, and thank you for sharing that story. I think a few things leap out at me. So number one, sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. So what I mean by that is, if we go back to 2017, when you did the first pivot, you actually had to stop for a period of time, rebuild foundations so that what you could do could grow and expand as you would like. And I think, that is so important, to have the right foundations in place, because it enables you to speed up, even if it kind of causes slowness in the short term whilst you're reconfiguring everything. And the other thing that leaps out to me is, just don't be afraid to pivot. If something that you're doing is not working, it doesn't necessarily mean the whole idea is wrong. It means that you need to relook at how you're looking at it. And product to market fit, emerges over time. It's not always something that's entirely obvious at the beginning. But if you're listening and watching and reading the signs and acting accordingly, pivoting as you're going along, that's what ultimately leads to long-term sustainable success within a company. So what you've said is just really interesting.
I think that's a great way of putting it, is you have to slow down sometimes to speed up. In our industry of selling food online, it hasn't necessarily been, the primary challenge has not been to get consumer demand. We have had a lot of businesses in our category build really large revenue businesses, but then they end up shutting down because they can't build anything that's profitable or scalable operationally. That's been sort of the story of our industries. There's been a number of big named companies where consumers love the product initially, but the company's losing money and they're not able to scale the product experience. So I think that's really important, is you have to build a great consumer experience that also works economically and is sustainable. And then on your second point about pivoting, one of my board members said to me once, don't try to push a boulder up a hill. And I think, entrepreneurs are sort of famous for being resilient and being, able to go through pain. But there's a big difference between being resilient by just pushing up, a boulder up an endless hill that you're never going to make progress with, versus being resilient by continuously trying new things. And I think it's critical to recognize when the path you're on is not the sustainable path, and to iterate quickly. And it's okay to pivot. It's okay to try something new. The only way that you no longer have a chance of pursuing your vision is when you run out of capital, and at that point, you can't pursue it anymore. Until that point, try as many things as possible until you really find the thing that's working.
Yes, I particularly resonate with the expression, don't push a boulder uphill. I think the reason sometimes why people doggedly stick to paths that aren't working is because if they change, then they also have to admit that they were wrong, which is why it's so important to have a culture where micro experimentation and therefore failure is encouraged, so you can find what does work.
I think that's absolutely correct. Oftentimes iterating quickly or pivoting can be viewed as sort of not having a vision. But those are two totally different things. And I think you mentioned, as long as you know the highest level why of what you're doing and why it matters. So from our perspective, that has been helping people to feel their best through food. As long as you know that, that's your vision. The how you get there is what you're pivoting on. And so it doesn't mean, you can have a very clear, compelling vision while still pivoting many times to get there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, vision is a completely different, that's the overarching why. but there are many different ways to, what's the expression? There are many ways to skin a cat. Not a very nice expression is the one that came to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of different paths you can take, and your job as the entrepreneur is just to find the one that has the least resistance.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so onto the topic of leadership. How do you personally define strong leadership, and how do you see it impacting the growth of your business?
Well, first and foremost, for me personally, I don't view Hungryroot as defining me. I think Hungryroot is a part of who I am, and it's a reflection of me. But my identity is much bigger than Hungryroot, and I think that that's important because oftentimes as entrepreneurs, we can view the company as our company. It's all about us, and I think that becomes really dangerous. So I think there's a healthy detachment between yourself and the company. That being said, I do think the company at the end of the day is a culture of the company is a reflection of your values. And so, there's 3 company values at Hungryroot, which are also my 3 personal values, which is being positive, proactive, and transparent. I really love those because I think that they reinforce each other, that each on their own has flaws. If you're just really positive all the time, everything, the roses are beautiful and everything, everything's great, and you're not necessarily being transparent about challenges or issues. And so transparency is a really critical second value to reinforce and support being positive. If you're really transparent about challenges, but you're also really positive, but you don't do anything about them, well, then that's not a great situation either. So being positive, transparent, and proactive, to me, those 3 together are really powerful. So those are the 3 company values. Those are my 3 personal values. We defined those pretty much on day 1 with Hungryroot. What we defined more recently, about a year or 2 ago, is 10 operating principles. Because it's the great thing about the values is that they're easy to remember. And so I think if you ask anyone at Hungryroot, you probably, I hope, they would say, oh, positive, proactive, and transparent are our values. And we define what that means so that there's a little bit more clarity around, what does it mean to be positive? What does it mean to be proactive? But it's not always very clear how you actually put those into practice on a day-to-day basis. So we have 10 operating principles that are much more specific. One of them, for example, is we view feedback as a gift. And so that's an example where it's a little bit more tactical in some ways of sort of how you can apply that operating principle to your day-to-day. So to your question around leadership, to me, it's important that what the impact that Hungryroot has and the impact that I have is larger than just Hungryroot. It's about a greater good in this world. And that's where sort of the detachment happens in some ways. It's about something bigger than just Hungryroot. In terms of actually putting sort of leadership and values into place, I find that having a succinct number of values plus a sort of more tactical list of operating principles really helps to drive the type of culture we're looking for.
No, thank you for elaborating on it. And I just want to pick up on a few things. So number 1, there is a separation between you and the company, which is a good thing because there is self-leadership, how you lead yourself, and also how you show up in the company. And the self-leadership obviously strengthens how you show up in the company. And the reason why I mention it is because sometimes entrepreneurs get lost in the identity of the company. And I suppose you see it in a job environment as well, where someone retires after 40 years doing something and they don't know what to do with themselves anymore because their identity was wholly to do with this one thing, their job, their career, their business, whatever it happens to be. So I love that you've mentioned that. The other thing around values, having a succinct number of values, yeah, really important. But where I see companies often fall down is where there's values that no one adheres to in any way.
Mhm.
So, kind of a joke. Oh yeah, those are our values. Who knows? Whatever, they're just words on a piece of paper or a vision board or whatever it is. And in order to really have those values lived, it has to be integrated, incorporated into the day-to-day behaviors of what everyone does within the company, starting from the top, because the top is modeling behaviors for everyone else. And therefore, I like what you've done in that you've given specific examples of this is how we live out these three values in our day-to-day behaviors.
You're exactly right that it can't just stop there with the naming of the values or even the naming of the operating principles. So one of the things we do at Hungryroot is during our quarterly review process, half of what you're being evaluated on is, are you living up to and embodying the company values? And through the interview process, that's a critical criteria that we're evaluating candidates on. So those are the two primary ways that we embed it into and sort of provide a feedback mechanism for people if we feel like they're not, embodying those values.
Mm. And in terms of you, how have you invested in yourself as a leader? And what steps do you take to make sure that you're continuing to evolve and grow?
Well, this reminds me of something actually that same board member said. So I'm bringing him up twice in this meeting, but he said to me, the best way of being an entrepreneur is to be an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like any other job. You just get better at it as the longer you do it. And there's so many, and it really resonates with me because I speak with a lot of people who want to be entrepreneurs, but they feel like they need to do something or learn something before they can go and start a company and be an entrepreneur. And I do think that the best way to be a leader is to put yourself into a leadership position. And so I've been really fortunate that, since 18, I've been leading teams. 18 was when I started my first company, and we had 50 workers, and within a couple of years, and so I sort of got a crash course, while I was in college around leading a large group of people. And I actually even attribute it to earlier in my childhood when I used to pitch in baseball, and that was sort of the number one thing I cared about pretty much up until maybe sophomore, junior year of college was baseball. And I think as a pitcher, you're in a leadership position. So I think part of why I probably was comfortable being in a leadership position early on in my career in a work environment was actually I was in a leadership position as a child in sports. But that to me is the best way of investing into yourself, is just getting the actual practice in a real environment. Obviously, there's a lot more you can do. I think, one thing that was hugely impactful for me was I spent 4 days at this course, which was it's built off of the Stanford Business School course called Touchy Feely, where it's all about speaking about your emotions and building self-awareness. And so this was probably in 2016 or 2017. I spent 4 days and nights. It was 15 of us in an Airbnb, all staying together for 4 days and 4 nights with two facilitators. And the only thing we could talk about for those 4 days was how we were feeling in the moment. And it was eye-opening because people share how you make them feel. People share, the range of emotions that they experience. So I do think that there's a lot of, that might sound a little extreme, but there's a lot of ways of practicing self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And that was certainly very life-changing for me.
Yeah, that does sound quite hardcore. But yeah, no, I appreciate the point because I hear not so much from established entrepreneurs, but people thinking about being an entrepreneur. Should I do an MBA? And it's like, well, you could do an MBA, pay $50,000 or $100,000, however much it is now, or you could just go and start a business and actually find out along the way. And to link back into what we were talking about earlier, the best way to learn is to experiment, to try things out, to see what works and to see what doesn't work. So yeah, I'm totally on board with that. And I think, you know, in terms of managing teams, again, yes, the best way to do it is to actually manage teams. And I think to draw upon the help and support that you can get along the way when certain things come up for you that perhaps you're like, I'm not so sure I'm doing this bit well. So if that's the emotional intelligence part, for example, that's that. But I think, you know, in the process of doing it becomes clear where you need to develop more.
Yeah, I think we all learn through feedback, and that feedback can take many different forms. So it can take starting a company, and the feedback is simply experiencing the challenges and you know, seeing what works and what doesn't. The feedback can be more extreme, like the 4 days and 4 nights I mentioned. The feedback can simply be, you know, with a mentor or a coach or your team. So I think the more that you can just open yourself up to receiving feedback, make sure that people around you know that you highly value feedback. You know, you're not going to hold feedback against anyone if it's tough feedback to receive. The more you can embrace that, I think the faster you're going to learn.
Finally, I'd love to know if you could go back in time and speak to your 20-year-old self, what piece of advice would you give to them?
That's a great question. You know, I think I would say I don't know who said this. I think it was a famous business person. It might have been a Steve Jobs, but or actually, you know, I think it was Bill Gates. You accomplish a lot less than you think in a year. You accomplish a lot less than you think you will in a year, but you accomplish a lot more than you think you can in a decade. And I think that that's really interesting because as I journal, and as I've looked back on my journals, it's funny because I'm like, wow, I thought I was going to accomplish all of that in a year, and sort of unrealistic goals. And I think that that's okay. It's okay not to accomplish things, as you don't always have to feel like there's this immediate rush, but you can be very bold and ambitious about what you want to accomplish over a longer period of time. And I think if you take that mindset, it can help you to set audacious goals, but be able to live and experience the path with a little bit less stress, because you're marching towards something big and exciting that you really care about. But if you don't accomplish, you know, what you wanted to in a given day or a week or even a year, that's not the worst thing.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because I think, you know, it can be disheartening if you're super ambitious and you set all these goals for a year and you don't hit them. But if you look at the long term, and if you are indeed working towards something you care about, it doesn't really matter. And I think to that point, I heard a coach say once that he sets 25-year
Oh, wow.
overarching goals. So here are the huge things I want to accomplish in the next 25 years. And that removes the element of time pressure.
That's great.
Ben, thank you so much for this interview today. I've really enjoyed this conversation and the pearls of wisdom that you've shared. So thank you very much. And to my listeners, I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation as well. If you would like to take part in the Leading the Modern Way interview series, please do reach out.